Hello everyone, here we are again once more in the shed. So it's been a week, I think, since I first attempted my fretboard, and I've had a little bit of time to reflect. I'm still overall quite happy with what we achieved, certainly for a first go. As I already said in the last video, the frets that I managed to cut, or the fret slots that I managed to cut, are not perfect, but I think for a first instrument they are perfectly usable. That said, I think there were some things I could have done better, and there were some things that I was just making a job for myself really, and I could have done things other ways that would have made things a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. First of all, the whole idea of sticking the fretboard template to the fretboard wasn't a bad idea, especially considering that was all I had available at the time. If anyone wanted to do it that way, I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't. However, on reflection, as long as you've got a fretboard with a straight edge, I think it would have been easier just to mark out where the frets were going to be with a template square to the fretboard. I think it would have saved a little bit of time and ultimately resulted in a slightly easier job. If I'm honest, I know I said I'm happy with this, and I think it's, as I said, a perfectly reasonable first attempt. But I know this side of me that wants the first instrument to be perfect isn't quite happy with it, because I know it's not millimetre accurate. A tenth of a millimetre accurate, I guess. When you build your first instrument, you're always kind of battling that thing of, oh, I want to build my dream instrument, versus what you should realistically expect for the first time you give it a go. I still have fairly high expectations for this instrument. I think the only real compromise I've kind of made so far is I opted to go for a glue-in neck as opposed to a through neck. The only reason for that being is I have the chance there that if I mess up one half of the instrument, I don't necessarily have to throw the whole instrument away. There's sort of, yes, there will be a point of no return, but there is at least so far I can get where I haven't wasted the entire instrument if one bit goes wrong. With that in mind, I had a bit of a dilemma really, because most people are advised when they build their first instrument to just do the body first and just leave the neck alone completely. But at the same time I thought, well, there's no point in if you're going to build more than one instrument, there's no point in avoiding the first neck. You might as well get some experience to start with. So what I actually decided to do was continue with this fretboard, but at the same time I have a second one to have a go with. I thought it would be really good to try putting what I've learned into practice really, and just doing something slightly different and seeing if it makes much difference to the finished product. I think it'll be really good if this one does turn out better, then I can continue to practice on this one. For example, I still intend to plane down the edges manually. I still intend to give inlays a go. I can try all of these things on the first fretboard, and then hopefully take the skills I've learned from that and apply them to the second fretboard and do a better job of it. Makes sense to me at the moment. Let's see how that actually goes. Now, with that in mind, last time I mentioned the tools that I have available. I'm still waiting on some coming. I still don't have a plane. I still don't have a good straight edge bigger than this. But I will be getting one at some point. It would have been financially much easier for me to just pay to have a fretboard made, frankly. This piece of ebony for the first fretboard I think cost about £20. I think it cost me about £10 for the fretting saw, and well, the paper template's kind of irrelevant, I guess. So you know, I invested about £30 in having a go at this fretboard. This fretboard, which I got from eBay, is perfectly comparable in quality and only cost me £10. That said, I decided to invest a little bit more in some better tools. For a start, I don't know if you can see in frame here already, I opted to get a slightly better fretting saw. Now, I don't know if I've got the other one lying about, but I mean, effectively they look on the face of it like pretty much the same kind of saw, but I can tell immediately when I look at this, the blade is much tougher, much straighter. There's just a bit more quality about it really, and while I think the other saw still would do for someone in a pinch, I think this cost about £20, and I think it's worth paying that much. I still question paying something like £60 or £100 or something like that for a Japanese saw, but I think spending a little bit extra on this nice Sheffield steel saw is probably worth it, so we'll see how that goes. Speaking of saws, I think I made a little bit of a mistake last time in that, well, not necessarily a mistake, but something I didn't expect at least. I mentioned that I did a little bit of research and tried to find a saw with the correct kerf. Kerf being the width of the slot that the saw actually cuts. Now, the fret wire that I bought, the main tongue, if you like, of it that sticks into the slots, is exactly 0.5 millimeter wide. And then I think you add on an additional 0.10 of a millimeter for the tangs that come out of the side. Now, it did occur to me at the time, certainly from past experience doing things like putting up shelves and things like that, normally when you work with things like raw plugs and that kind of thing, you normally want to drill a hole that is slightly smaller than the thing you're going to try and put in there, because you want it to grip tightly and not come out. It occurred to me at the time that it might be the same with fretboards, in that you might want a slot slightly thinner than the fret that you're going to put in there. But at the same time, I wasn't sure whether going down a fretboard, forcing in things like that, would cause the fretboard to kind of bow, because you're effectively forcing it apart every time you put a fret in. Granted, I probably didn't look very hard for the answer on this, but for whatever reason I decided to actually go with a kerf of 0.5 millimeters for the fret saw, which seemed quite common. And I found that the frets did fit in there, and they did grip the sides, but not as tightly as I would have hoped. And then I saw a video not too long after that, actually. It was one of the Crimson Guitars videos where he did in fact actually mention that. I think he used a kerf of about 0.3, 0.4, which I guess makes a lot more sense to me. Truth be told, you know what, I don't actually know what the kerf of this saw is. I just know that I bought it from a Luthier supply store specifically as a fretting saw, and I have seen this specific saw sold in many stores as their only fretting saw, so I kind of trusted that this is going to be the correct kerf. When I'm actually measuring it up against the existing slots that I cut with the other saw, to be honest with you, as far as I can tell, it looks about the same. So I don't know if the convention is to maybe actually have slots which are kind of intended for to have the frets glued in, as opposed to just held in by the frets themselves, gripping the sides of the wood. I'm not sure. But to be honest with you, I agree that I prefer to have frets which are not glued in, but at the same time, if I came to the point where I had to glue them in, it wouldn't really bother me too much. I'd just try and make sure that I do it in such a way that should the instrument need to be refretted in the future, then we have as little trouble as possible, you know. So all of that said, the only other tools that I need to show you before we crack on today is, I still don't have a meter rule, but what I did buy was a pre-cut fret gauge, and I've checked this against my existing PRS, and all of these little notches do match up exactly over the frets of my instrument. The only thing I should note is that this final notch is actually where the nut is supposed to be, and rather bizarrely, where the middle of each of the notches on here seem to match up exactly with where the fret slot needs to be. When it comes to the nut, my nut at least seemed to be on the very edge of that slot, so I do need to remember that as I go. Rather handily, this one actually has some inlay templates pre-cut out as well, which, to be fair, I'm not going to use, but it's still quite nice to have them in there, I guess. Last, completely unnecessary, I know, but I also came across this. This is by a chap called Chicken Bone John Guitars. I think he has an eBay store. It's also actually where I bought the fretboards from. Now, what can I say about this? This is a mitre box, in case you didn't guess, and for the money I paid for it, I think a standard steel mitre jig bought from somewhere like Stu Mac will set you back somewhere in the region of £250. So unless you're regularly building guitars, it's never going to be financially a good idea to get one of those. This guy's building these himself out of wood, and you know what, I forget exactly what it cost off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was less than £50. And looking at it, you know, geometrically, it's not precision made. I mean, it's better than I could do, but I do know that if I tried to put the saw in there as it was, it nips a little bit and I'd have to fettle it. But I had a little play around with it in the house and I still found I could get it to the point where it was perfectly usable. I mean, so yeah, that's a little bit of a luxury item on my part really, but I thought it would still be one step better than trying to use, well, one of these, a normal mitre block that you get from a DIY store. So yeah, the plan today, in case you haven't guessed then, is we are going to take this second fretboard, try and mark it out using this marking guide, and then we're going to try and cut the slots using the new saw and the mitre block. So it's going to be a lot of the same kind of things you saw last time. I'm going to rush through it a little bit quicker, but we'll get to the end and we'll see how the two fretboards compare. There's got to be an easy way to do this. It's probably complete overkill, but nevertheless, I've got that in the position I want it. I can feel that that's nice and square on the end, square along all these edges, so I'm going to get it marked. I just wanted to interject at this point the quick note about how these are actually meant to be used. These notches on the side, which I'm currently using to mark out my fret positions with a pencil, although that works absolutely fine, they're actually intended to be used with a mitre jig. The intention is that you would take the template and your fretboard as it's going to be, and you would attach the piece of wood to the template with some double-sided tape. It must be completely square to the edge of the template. Once you've done that, you can then take the template and place it in a specialist mitre jig, which I happen to have one here. Now, as you probably saw in the video, or you will see in the video in a moment, I'm going to use this mitre jig to manually cut each of the frets by eye. But what I didn't realise at the time, because I've quite frankly never seen one of these used, I've only watched artisanal craftsmen measure and cut their frets by hand, there's actually a small locator pin in these jigs. Don't know if you can see that there with the camera. If not, I'll put a still photo up afterwards. And that pin just there is designed to fit in each of these notches. So you just pop the template in place until it hits the first notch, do your cut, move it along to the next notch, and then without really thinking about it, your frets are going to be perfectly spaced each time. Now it just so happens that because I bought my fret spacing template and the mitre jig from 2 different manufacturers, the size of the locator pin doesn't actually match up the template, so I couldn't have done that easily anyway. What I could have done if I really wanted to was I could have took the locator pin, which happened to come with this, and insert it into the mitre jig and maybe saved myself a little bit of bother, but you live and learn. I will definitely do that next time, but thankfully the fretboard that I attempted did turn out okay, spoiler alert. So I'm okay with it for the time being, but just so you know. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. Those lines match up perfectly. And to be fair, now I think about it, I only needed the marks on one side, didn't I? Because I could have used this. Never mind. Looking good. One fretting jig held in a vise. Also just fettled it slightly so that the fretting saw does fit in there. You'll notice the fretting saw doesn't actually fit all the way to the bottom. I assume, because I bought the saw and the jig from the same vendor, I assume that's by design. I think if I was to take my fretboard as is and try and slide it under there, it is cutting what looks to be about the right depth for the tangs into the wood already. Again, as with the first time, I'm only really looking to do an initial marking of the frets before it's radiused. Let's have a go. Okay, that was okay. That's a much cleaner cut than I was achieving last time. I don't think it would be over the top to actually maybe clamp the wood in place. I really do need to invest in some smaller clamps though. I think I'll just persevere as is. Measure twice, cut once. In the case of a fretboard, measure 50 million times, then cut once. Time to add to the ebony dust collection. So how's that gone? Well, immediately I'm way happier with this than I am with this. I think by eye the fret slots definitely look just a little neater and a little thinner as well. Good lighting definitely helps when doing this, which I don't have in here at the moment. But I've been a lot more accurate this time round with cutting these. There was about 3 of the fret slots where the cut is actually on the edge of the pencil line rather than straight through it, but what are we talking there? It's, you know, maybe 1/4 of a mil, something like that. It's certainly more accurate than this one was, and there's a lot less in the way of errors and that kind of thing. I'm curious now to see how some fret wire fits in there in terms of snugness. Let me just get some. Yeah, that looks fairly tight. I'm not going to know for sure until both, because the fret wire is already radiused, so not going to know until the fretboard is radiused as well, but that certainly is looking good.